So, CRUD repository we have already seen. Let's start with the pom.xml file. So on the top of web and alls, I have one more dependency added called Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. So once you implement this data JPA, then you're gonna have one repository with the name of JPA repository. Yes. So probably I can show you that later, but in this program, I have just implemented my own layer. So the first important things you have to make sure that you have enough properties given for Hibernate. So for Spring Hibernate, the first and important things is the dialect. You have to give the dialect option. I hope you have worked in the Hibernate, right? Hemant?
No, but
Okay.
I'm aware.
Okay. So Hibernate is one of the backend framework which is mainly dealing with the interacting with the database. And the reason we have Hibernate in picture is because of JDBC disadvantage. So JDBC is having the lots of disadvantage, and among them, one disadvantage is the database dependency. So if you're dealing with pure JDBC, you have to write your own query. Like it could be a procedure query, it could be a function query, it could be a complex join query. And as you know, these queries are dependent on database vendor. So the same syntax of creating procedure will not work of Oracle into MySQL and vice versa. So the problem with JDBC was database dependency. So like if you have some software and you want to sales to multiple clients, so whoever, let's say your software, your product is using the backend software as a, I mean database as a Oracle, and you went for the other client, and this client is saying, hey, I like your product, but I won't be able to proceed because you are using Oracle. If you can run this application in my MySQL, then I can purchase your product. Because cost is always there. Client even don't want to maintain a two license cost for Oracle also and MySQL also. So if your application is developed in pure JDBC, you don't have any option. You have to start migrating the all database script from Oracle syntax to MySQL. So this migration can take good amount of time and good amount of resources. So always the cost is involved. So industry, we are looking for some alternative where we don't have a dependencies. So when I say dependency, like my code is the same. If you're saying I'm using the Oracle database, okay, I'm compatible with you also. Somebody saying, hey, I'm using the MySQL, I'm saying, okay, my application will work for you also. So this is the main reason people were looking for Hibernate. And how Hibernate do this with the help of dialect. So for each database, just like a driver class, just like username password, there is a dialect available for each and every database. And this dialect is helping Hibernate to compose the query, to write a query according to the syntax of that database. So
Okay.
first and important things in the Hibernate you need to know is the dialect. Okay, so now, as you know, Spring Guy is very smart. So whenever they found this particular framework is going to get popularity, this library is going to get popularity, they always include into their repository. So now if you're using a Spring framework, then there is no need to go standalone using the Hibernate configuration. So if I show you the very simple Hibernate application, it should be something like this. So for example, here I have employee management project. The one configuration file you have to maintain, which is holding the complete details about your Hibernate and the JDBC, because internally Hibernate is also using the JDBC. So HBM2 DDL auto, which means you want to create a table or you want to update the existing table. So SQL means if you are inserting some set of data or any query which Hibernate is generating, you want to see in your console or not. That is for this purpose. Dialect is the main important, I told you. So right now I'm using H2 database, so I have given the H2 dialect. Then these four properties are related to JDBC, URL, username, password, and driver class. So this is the one configuration file you must have to feed if you are using a standalone Hibernate application. And
So
another,
what is
yeah,
the difference between this XML and the properties file which we have seen earlier? Like anything can be used.
no, this is pure Hibernate application. It's not a Spring Boot application. So
Oh,
a Spring Boot each come up with the idea we don't want to maintain a XML file. Configuration purpose they are using the properties file. So if I convert this whole project into a Spring Boot, then probably I don't need this XML file. But I'm saying you the typical Hibernate application how it looks like. Because Hibernate is not having any mechanism of their own properties file accessing and all these things. You have to write your
okay. So the
custom.
Spring Boot, then we have to give it only properties file.
Yes, yes. So same thing, same information you have to provide there, but not in XML file. Actually, in the properties file. Internally, they
Okay.
might be using the XML file, or they are having their own annotation or lots of mechanism, lots of reflection Spring Boot using. But here,
Okay.
if you are dealing completely with the Hibernate application, and in fact, if you look at any legacy application which is having the XML, I mean Hibernate using, then they are having the XML like this. So these properties is mandatory to establish the database connection and also set up the dialect according to that database. Next is mapping file. Hibernate is asking one more mapping file. This mapping file is saying what is your class, because internally Hibernate is using ORM, object relational mapping. So it is asking you deal with your class objects. Do not deal directly with the tables and the queries. So the idea is for ORM, if you have one table, you have to define one class also for that table. And that class is to say Pojo class. So again, if it is a XML, then you can define something like this. I am saying this is my class and I want the table to be created with the name of this. This table is optional. If you not give table, then it will be creating the table with the name of your class itself. One very, very important point in the Hibernate is each table should must have a primary key. Hibernate will not allow you to create any table or use any table which is not having primary key. So this section, if you see, I have one employee.java where I have a lots of properties. I want to make this ID as a primary key. That is the reason here I have given the another section ID, and Hibernate is using lots of generator class. So what this generator class is saying, as we know, primary key values are unique and not null. This is the database constraint. So Hibernate is giving you option. You want to use your unique value or you want me to give every time new value to your primary key. So if you give native as a generator class in Hibernate, then this guy is going to start creating a sequence internally and it will pick up the primary key value every time to feed this ID. Remaining properties you can set by your setters method. Again, this column is optional. If you want the property name is different and you want the column name supposed to be different, then you can use these column properties. Else you can ignore this also. If you ignore this column, then whatever property name you have given, it is going to use the same as a column name. And finally, we have a manager class who is loading the configuration, taking the session factory, with the help of session factory, creating the session, setting the all value, and finally saving that employee object. So this is the typical flow of Hibernate application. Configuration file, mapping file, and one Pojo class, which is actually a entity class also. But here I'm using the XML based. This file can be easily replaced with the annotation. So you can easily put all the annotation required for this information in your Pojo class itself. That I will be showing you in this Spring Boot application. Okay, so let's come to the Spring Boot again. So again, dialect I have given. So SQL, yes, I want to see the query. HVM2 DDL auto, update I have given, because I don't want to delete the existing table if it is, or if you want to delete it, then you can give create, and then package to scan, from where it have to start scanning for the entity. And also this property is something additional I have added because I was facing some problem, and I might forgot why I have added this. Spring JPA properties hibernate.current session context.class. Actually, the error was giving me this suggestion while running this application, so I have added it. I will help you with that. What is this? So I have feed the all details related to my Hibernate. I have not given the details related to my database because I'm using the H2 database, and the moment H2 database is there in my pom.xml file, the basic authentication is going, basic connection is going to be automatically set. So that's the beauty of Spring Boot. You don't need to define a data source. You don't need to define lots of uh, configuration related to database connection. It is always reading their class path, and if it is found there is a H2 database enabled, then it is going to automatically give you a connection. So now come to the Hibernate configuration. So Hibernate configuration, if you look at, then if it is a Spring based Hibernate, then you have something called Hibernate JPA Session Factory. So I have explicitly defined one bean of this class called Hibernate JPA Session Factory. And under this, I have set one entity manager factory. So how this is going to work, let me show you. So we have a factory defined, and under this factory, I'm going to give entity management manager factory. So this is my DAO layer, fine. Service layer. This is service layer implementation. And this is my DAO, which is directly saying give me the system factory. This configuration is to get the bean of session factory. Okay. This guy is factory bean, and it will return as the session factory object. That's completely fine. Okay, so this entity manager factory is basically to the purpose of this is coming when you are doing cleanup. So when you are doing shutdown, then you want some of the all the open session or all the session factory have to be closed. That's the reason we are using this entity management factory. But I'm quite not sure why I have added this. Usually we need to get a session factory, and this is not kinds of mandatory. I will check with that after removing this, whether it's working or not. But yes, this is for mainly cleanup purpose. When you are doing some shutdown, you want the properly connection and factory have to be closed. Well, so idea is we have to get a session factory. In fact, if you look at my Hibernate application also, without session factory object, you cannot proceed in the Hibernate. So we have created the session factory. And once we get a session factory, we can easily get the session, and all the methods like save, update, delete, all these methods are coming from this session. So here also in the Spring Boot, we have to define one bean of session factory. So in this class, I have just kept the configuration, making sure that after this, the session factory bean is going to be created. The name of session factory in the Spring is Hibernate JPA session factory. Actually, it is an implementation of session factory. Now, other things you have to notice is the user.java. You remember just now I was saying that this mapping file can be easily configured in our Pojo class directly. So we don't need this mapping file at all. And how this all information can be easily passed. So remember in that mapping file, we were having the first information, what is the table name. So whichever Pojo class you have, just annotate that class as a @ of entity. These all configurations are related to Hibernate. In fact, I can say JPA. JPA is a specification and Hibernate is one of the implementation. So @ of entity, you have to annotate the class which is representing I am a table in the database. Then we have @ of table. Whatever table name you want to give, you can give like this. JSON ignore properties. Some of the properties are there which you don't want to include in your JSON. So in that case, you can give these properties. Implementing with serializable. I hope you know the serializable interface. You know, Hemant, what is serialization? What is serializable interface?
Yeah,
Okay, so why we are using this?
it's related to threading, right?
No,
I don't
it's not related
recall.
to the thing. So serialization is basically to convert your object state into bytecode. So whenever you have a network call or whenever you are doing a writing into a file, we are doing the serialization. So whatever data you are flowing over that network, you have to implement serializable interface. This interface is one of the marker interface, and when say marker interface, it is not having any method inside their body. So if you open this is the pure Java code. It's not having any method. So how it's working basically, it is just informing the JVM that this object have to be serialized. And I hope you know that even in the database, when you are inserting or you're doing any operations, database is also writing your file, writing the all data into a file system. But let's say you have inserted some value like username, password, first name, last name, etc. And these value is going to directly write into the file, then what will be somebody can access those file directly and read the confidential information. So idea here is we need to serialize that object. If you serialize it, the complete object state becomes in the bytecode and nobody can read the bytecode. Until or unless they will deserialize it, they cannot read that file. And hackers, even if they hack the data over the network, if you flow, let's say I'm sending some user data. So if somebody has hacked this information over the network, they cannot get the actual value what it is going because it is completely in the bytecode format. And for reading those values, they need to deserialize this. And nobody can hack my user class. People are not going to hack our code actually. Code is always sitting in the some of the repository, or it is not actually flowing over the network. The only thing is flowing over the network is your data. So this is the good practice. Whenever you are using Hibernate, whatever Pojo class you have, please implement with the serializable interface. And I will highly recommend you go through once again what is serialization, how this is working, how to deserialize it, and you will be having the good understanding. Similarly, we have one more concept in Core Java called externalization. So what is that externalization? All these things you can read through. Well, so this implementation is only to make our data secure over the network. Now, primary key. I told you, Hibernate, if you're using Hibernate, then you must have to define any of your property as a primary key. So @ of ID. You just need to put @ of ID. Again, here also we have a strategy, generator class. If you want Hibernate to feed the value for all this primary key value, then you can give generation type auto. If you have your sequence defined, let's say you have one database sequence and you want that every time from that sequence you want to pick up the value, you can select the sequence and give the sequence name. Similarly, we have an identity. So all these things are the different options of your generator class. Now we have a country, we have a name, column are not mandatory. If you not give, it will be considering this. So I'm removing this from here.
So
So
basically, this is only when we are trying to create a table and all, right? But when we are
exactly.
trying, where in a Spring Boot, mostly we'll do insert, update, and delete on the right, like normal web applications
Right.
instead of.
All CRUD operation mostly we are doing. Yes. Create, update,
Yeah.
read, and delete. Yes.
Okay, so then ID and all is not required. All we need to do is just create some values, objects, and that should be fine, right? Having
No, no,
different.
no, no, no. Let's say you want to, this is the primary key. You want to delete a particular ID. No. Employee ID with this. Then without this ID, how can you?
Okay, so yeah, we'll have, okay, we should have some value and map it to an ID, but generated value is not required, right?
Uh, okay. Generator value is actually a primary key value.
Okay, okay, maybe during
This,
insert we'll.
yes, while inserting automatically one value is going to be inserted with this ID.
Okay, fine.
And that is the unique always. That's the primary key properties, right? So here,
Yeah.
I don't see you have a two option. You can feed the primary key value always from your end, but there is a highly chance you might be pushing sometime duplicate value. So in that case, it will not work. It will fail. It will give you the constraint exception, SQL constraint exception. So to have a safer side, why to take a risk of unique value? That's the reason usually we are asking the Hibernate, hey, you take the responsibility of giving the primary key value every time. But yes, there will be one column sitting into your table, which is a ID and having always a unique value. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. So then after
So
Spring
if we
Boot,
have to deal
yeah,
with, if we have like 50 tables, for
mhm.
all the 50 tables, we have to create each entity separately, entity class.
Yes, yes. For each table, you have to define one entity class. That's a Pojo class. In
Okay.
fact, not only for table. If you have some view, for that also you have
Okay.
to define one. If you have some procedure which is returning you
Mhm.
some set of data, to access that procedure data also you have to define one Pojo class. So
Okay.
wherever you
Got
have a data, you want to map this, you have to have this, because that's if you don't, if you want to execute the query directly like join query or calling a procedure like JDBC API, like call procedure method, there is a callable interface, right? That is different story. But when you are coming in the ORM main funda is you must have a object. You have to start dealing with the object, and you will be start dealing with the object. It means you must have a class. So each class which is saying that I'm an entity, you have to give the name here. So let's say you have some view, so you have to give that view name. You have some procedure, then you have to give the procedure name. So there's a lot of things. Huh? Okay. So now, since we have defined all the information of mapping into this Pojo class, so you don't need to have now this class in Hibernate. The all information
Mhm.
of this class has moved to the Pojo class. Okay. Now let's come to the controller. What this controller is having. Just ignore this swagger and also I will be talking about it in some time. But yes, so we have a request mapping starting always from the users. Then this guy is having the auto wide with the service layer. Service layer is having the dependency of DAO layer. But let's see what I'm doing basically here. So I have a get mapping. Somebody is going to pass me the ID. With the help of path variable, I'm fetching that ID. Then after I'm calling this user service find by ID method, I'm saying give me the user of that ID. If user is not null, then I'm sending the response something like this. I want to send the data response in the JSON format. So for this purpose, this is the configuration. Produce media type is application JSON value. You have to understand this response entity also. So this response entity is again coming from the Spring Boot side, and this is very widely used You just keep the Pojo class, or you have a list, you have whatever. This guy will automatically convert the data according to the media type which you have specified. So I'm passing the user object, and this is again very, very important. As I told you that Spring Boot is used for microservices development, and your microservices is having the many consumer. So your consumer are mainly focused on this status. So for each operation, for each HTTP method call, there is a separate status code. And again, Spring Boot is providing you one enum with the name of HTTP status, which is having the different status code. But you don't need to directly give the code. In fact, you have to give the value of that. Most of the case, if your call is success, we are saying HTTP status OK. It means this is 200. If you remember the typical Ajax call in the previous day, we used to give the 200 call, 200. So we have different status code. For example, that if user is not found, then we are saying HTTPC status not found, 404. So this is one of the different status code. Similarly, have 201 for creation. Then we have 403 for unauthorized. So it is very, very important for a REST API developer to know the proper status code and use that code whenever you feel it's fine. If you are very much confused what status code I have to give in this scenario, then this is the all-rounder. Means okay. HTTP status OK, which is directly saying that your call was success. Okay, so this is for fetching the value by ID. Then we have a name. You can also fetch the user by name. This time it can give you the list of user, because ID is always unique. So there is no chance you can get more than one user. But when you are fetching by name, it might be that you will be having the list of users. So this is for that purpose. Then we have a create. You remember the post mapping. So now this guy is again accept. So it is going to accept the application JSON value. So make sure that you have a proper JSON body while sending this, calling this create user method. And after that, I'm calling the service method, passing the user, again creating a headers. Under that header, I am passing the set location, share ID to URI, and I'm sending a status created. So why I'm sending this headers while making a postman call, I can verify that. So set location, build an exception, get ID to URI. Okay, I will see it when I will call this. Then we have a get all, update, delete, update user partially. So you know there is one more REST API method called patch. So this patch method, patch mapping is basically what it is doing. It is updating the user partially. Means you want to update but not complete object. So in that case, you are using this patch mapping. Very rarely used, and I personally never use this patch mapping. But yeah, you should know and explore a bit more on this.
So,
Uh,
well, like,
hmm,
half means I did not understand. Partially means.
okay. You know, update, what this update actually say. In the case of update, most of the time you are having the country change, name change, all these things. But let's say you just want to update the country, not the name. Out of this for all properties, you just want to, you can easily do with the update also. But patch is especially for define partial update. Means in this object, you don't want to update everything, only the certain properties. That is patch. So if you look at this update country, I'm passing the user object. Even in here also, I'm passing the same thing. But here I am calling the set method, set name, all these things. But in this case, I am calling directly update method while setting this country. Let me Google it a bit more, then you can understand a bit more. Even I forgot patch method in REST API to make partial update on resource. Can you see that? Whatever I explain you, it is the similar. You don't want to update the whole object. You want to just update the partial, one of the attribute in your object. So instead of using the put method, you can use for patch. And why? If you see put method request also modify a resource entity. So to make more clear, patch method is the correct choice for partial updating on existing resource. This point is important. So when you use put method, which is for update, modify a resource entity. Did you understand this?
Yeah.
Yes. So when you have a partial one, do not use put method, rather than patch is advisable. Okay. So like this way, we have a controller which is calling that update partially. So now come to the service. Service method is having the all methods which I'm using defined. Then I have an implementation, and this service guy is having a one properties of DAO layer. Here you can see two more annotation. One is at the rate of service, which is a Java MVC guidelines. Whichever your service layer is there, you put a at the rate of service annotation. You can ask me what is the benefit of putting this, because Spring is going to do lots of optimization when you annotate particular class as at the rate of service, because service class are those class which is having a mostly the business logic written. So if you annotate this class as a service, then Spring is going to treat it in a different way, and keeping this object in the container in the well structured, so that when anybody wants to access that, they can easily access it, and it is going to optimize the memory and life cycle of the project object properly. And also it is going to easily create the object of this class. You don't need to actually create a bean of this. Spring Boot is automatically going to define the bean, which is by default accessible. So another is the at the rate of transaction. The Spring transaction. So by default, the Spring transaction is saying it will be committed if there is no exception. In your flow, anywhere it found that there is exception, the whole transaction will be rolled back. So there is always a debate where to put at the rate of transactional annotation. Is it the service layer or is it the DAO layer? Some of the people used to put this at the rate of transaction on the DAO layer, but I prefer to put into the service layer. The reason is there is a highly chance the exception might coming on your service layer. DAO layer is always straightforward. It is hitting the query, it is executing the query and bringing the data for you. So exception chance is mostly in the service layer. So that is the reason I have put this at the rate of transactional annotation under this service layer. Now, if you go to the Spring transaction, there is a huge, this is a very huge topic. The propagations are there, when you want, uh, you can nested, you have a nested transaction. You can, there's lots of things, if I get time, I can explain you that. But yeah, one of these things are propagation. So somewhere you want, even though exception occurs, these object have to be saved, this object have not be saved. So all these things can be done under the Spring transaction. I might have the separate topic in a Spring DAO layer. If I'm teaching the Spring DAO layer, then there I'm explaining the complete details about this transaction and all. So this guy is having the DAO layer. Let's go to the DAO layer. Now, to deal with the DAO layer, you always need a session. Without session, you cannot save the object, you cannot bring the object, all these things you cannot do. So that after auto wiring with the session factory, what I'm doing is I'm calling the session factory get current session method to get the session. And once I have a session, I have a user, I'm gonna save this. Similarly for get user, there's a criteria method, get the all users and return back. 1 second, huh? Okay, so this is for getting the all users. Then we have a find by ID. So there is a get method, and you are going to get this. These all are the Hibernate methods. Similarly, we have find by name. So you have a criteria with restrictions. If you don't know these all restrictions, what is criteria, then I will tell you. You need to go through the Hibernate because these are the libraries where you are going to give the Pojo class name, setting some restrictions. So this guy is putting the where condition. So if this piece of code is going to be executed, the query is select a star from user where name like this, whatever you are passing. Similarly, we have a update, we have a delete, and we have a patch method specific to particular properties. So with that, I think we are ready to run this application. But let me check. I have my H2 database enabled or not. I might be not having. So H2 console I have opened. Okay. And this is the in-memory database. So probably for accessing that, I need to use this URL. Okay. But that's fine. Spring Boot application. Let me run this. Java application started running. So you can see that since you have added the Hibernate related configurations, so Spring Boot has did all the Hibernate related object creation, property check, all the things this guy has did. In fact, he's saying table not found user info, so he has created that also. Okay, so now we have to access that H2. So here I will be giving this connect. What is wrong now? Mem test not found, either pre-create or what happened? Let me read this. So it's saying this is how I have to read. That is what I am giving. Why it is not taking? Oh, I'm sorry. This is the installed one. I have to access their in-memory wala. Got it. this is supposed to work. Yeah. So you can see that our table is created, that is user info, and there is no data because we haven't inserted any value. So that I can do now with the help of Postman. So let me open the Postman. But before that, I can manually add one country name. India name is a. Okay. What is this? 8090 slash user. Let me check the method for getting all users. This is slash get users slash get. Yep. So you can see that I'm getting the one record from the database, and this is responding. Change to post. Under the body, I have to define country name to country ID. I'm giving to. In fact, if I am not give also, I hope it should work because I have given the auto. And Japan BBB. What is the create? This is for create. And you have noticed this status code, right? So 200 OK has came because of HTTP status OK. Click on send. 415. User unsupported media type. Content type application JSON. This is fine. Then why it is saying? Okay. Can you see that 4201 created? It means this call is also success. Maybe there's some problem. I don't know. I found the same stuffs, but somehow it has picked up. Now you can see there is a two records sitting in the database. And like this way, you can play around with this all methods. These all methods like get by user ID, get by username, create users. We have seen update user, delete user, and update user partially. Any question, Hemant? Did you understand the flow?
Yeah.
So we are main here. You have to notice is the Hibernate session factory configuration. Other than all informations are pretty simple, very simple configuration. You don't need to deal with lots of lengthy configurations which Hibernate is asking you. These all in the properties. Okay. I have also introduced Swagger here, but I don't think so. We have discussed about Swagger in the previous class, right?
Right.
Okay. So before coming to this topic, let's understand what is Swagger and how we can achieve the Swagger in our application. Swagger is widely used for visualizing APIs. So do you remember I told you that whenever you are releasing any REST APIs, so as a REST API providers, you have to provide the lots of documentation for your consumer how to use your REST applications. And preparing a documentation is not straightforward. In fact, you have to take care what is the endpoints, what is the mandatory fields, what are the data types of those, what a status code you will be getting after that. These are the information you have to have feel to your consumers, and it is expected to be prepared by the developer. So whenever there is a lengthy task, or whenever there is a anything's coming which is not technical, developer used to find out some alternative ways, and that's what this Swagger developer has did. So Swagger developer has developed a API in such a way that it is going to read your configurations of your REST API, especially the controller, and based upon that, it is generating the very standard UI for you to access this. So to achieve the Swagger configuration, you have to add two dependencies. One is this Swagger 2, and another one is the Swagger UI. Rest I told you, it is an open source project used to generate the REST API documentation for web services. It is providing a very good user interface UI by which anybody can understand what is the endpoints and how they can call these endpoints. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about right now under this Swagger configuration. So if we look at this pom.xml file, we have added the Swagger UI and Swagger 2. With this, I also have to maintain a configuration of this Swagger. So try understanding the Swagger configuration. So for Swagger, you have to add one more additional class that is having the at the rate of enable Swagger 2, this annotation on the top of at the rate of configuration. The configuration is required wherever you are using the bean or you are creating a bean. So under this, we have used docket, which is coming from the Swagger API directly. You have to create this docket class object with the required information, what is your base package name, and then after these all are default one, and one information is also get API info. So sometimes you need to give a contact if something went wrong in this API, then to whom you have to contact. So people used to prefer giving the name, somebody used to prefer giving the mail group. All these things you're gonna give here. Also here the API information. So what is the application title, what is the description for that, and finally the versions of this along with the contact which you have created. So pretty simple and very easy configuration for Swagger. Just need to create a docket with required information, base package info and API information. In fact, API information you can skip if you don't want to provide. Okay, this is not mandatory one, but only thing you have to create a docket object. Now, I also want this Swagger page supposed to be my landing page. Means whenever user is hitting my home page, I want the Swagger page have to be come up. For that also, I have did a small configuration. So we will be talking about the interceptor in some time. But yeah, here look at, I have created one class web MVC config, which is actually implementing the web MVC configure interface. And here they are providing one method called add view controller. So under this, you just need to redirect. So whenever somebody is hitting the home page, I'm saying bring this guy to the swagger UI.html. Now from where this swagger UI.html is coming, you don't need to bother. I have not any HTML created for this. This is the home page of Swagger page. If you not do this, then somebody have to manually hit this URL to get the Swagger page. But that's not make good. You have to enable it by default so somebody can easily understand what is this application all about. So remaining all things you will find pretty simple. We have a student class, simple class. Then we have a controller, which is having the in-memory list here. Swagger definition. Now at the rate of controller class, wherever you have a REST controller, you have to define the all informations related to Swagger. So first things I'm saying, Swagger definition. Tag is again not important because, but it's required sometime when you have a related controller. So you have right now user controller, you have user service controller, you have user payment controller. So these all are related to user. So that time this tag is going to help you. Yeah, so I have given here right now demo description, whatever you want you can give. And now on each API, I just saying that API operation, what is this is for. Again, this is not mandatory, but if you want to define it, what this API is going to do, you can do that like this. So API operation, everywhere you found the API information and the value, what is this API is all about. And we have here simple application. Let's run it. (8090) localhost 8090. Look at this. So here I have a demo Swagger page. Whatever contact I have created, it is there. And here is your controller. So click on this. Look at that, how well defined this is. So you have a get a student by name. And for all operations, there are the all possible methods which you can use. But here I'm going to use the get a students methods. Here, get all students. So let's open it and see what is happening. If you open it, it is going to actually give you the response in this format. See how smart it is. It has read your Pojo class, prepared the JSON for you, and he's saying once you click on this API, the expectation is you will get 200 status code, and the response will be coming something like this. It is also giving you some sort of introduction, hint. If you're getting 401, make sure that you have an unauthorized. You're getting 403, then forbidden, 404, not found. All this basic information it is giving. Now, if you click on try out and things are fine, it is going to give you the all possible value here. So it is better than Postman, I believe, for testing your REST API. In fact, here you are giving the complete details. If you are a Linux machine holder, you can run this. What is the endpoints? This is the endpoints. What is the headers? There is no headers. What is the response? What you got? It is here. Can you see that? Response code, response headers. These are the default response headers coming along with this. So isn't it very cool? You don't need to bother about what are the mandatory fields. Let's say if I am saying that get a student by country. So this guy will tell me you have to feed this value. What is the country name for you? So here I'm giving the country name as India. It is clearly saying it's a mandatory, so you cannot make a call without this. And look at this. Whatever data is for India, it is coming. But if you are not having this Swagger, then how someone can hit this? You have to forcibly, and in fact, if you not give this India, it will give you the validation also. They're saying you cannot make a call without passing this country value. Similarly, you have a delete. For delete also, it is asking you give the country details. If you pass this, it will delete that. You can play around with that. So this is the Swagger, which is actually now this day very famous for documenting your REST API. Any question, Hemant?
No, I'm good.
You were knowing Swagger initially?
No, this is the first time I'm seeing.
Oh, cool. You told you have been working with the Spring Boot sometime, right?
No,
Spring Boot is first time for you. Spring Framework you have worked, right?
no, I think everything is first, but I'm aware of the concept. It
Okay,
is not
okay,
completely new, but I'm aware.
okay. You don't have any working experience, but concept-wise you are okay with all
Right,
these things,
yeah.
right? Okay. Good then. Fine. So, so I can proceed with this pace, right? You are getting it.
Right. Yes.
Okay. I remember last class you told Niket you can pick up a bit faster because I'm getting all these things. So, but this is my a standard pace I used to maintain, even though people know or not know, so everybody can get it. So okay, cool. Similarly, in the previous application, which I shown you that Hibernate wala, under Hibernate wala also I have enabled the Swagger. So this configuration I didn't talk right now, but now you can easily refer. The same thing I have did here also, and we have a WebMVC configurer, which is actually going to redirect it to Swagger UI.html. So now if you run this application again, and hit the home page, look at this user controller and all the methods which you have, it is showing you here. Okay, so you can play around with Swagger, and if you have any question, you can come to me. We can discuss on this. With that, let's proceed with the different topic, and that is a small topic, YAML. So you know what is YAML?
Yeah, another programming language.
Yeah, so Spring Boot is supporting both the things, properties file or YAML file. So YAML is stands for Ent Markup Language. So consider it, it is like a properties file, but it is in more precise way. It is having the better way of reusability. You don't need to repeat lots of things. For example, you can take this. So if you want to define a label property 1, property 2, property 3, all these things, you have to go like this. But if you look at this 3 configuration, what you are repeating here, you are repeating the level 1, level 11, sorry, level 1 again and again. So this is the kinds of duplicate C. But same thing, if you defined in YAML file, look at this, how it's going to be. Level 1, it's just a matter of indentation. So you have to give some space, and automatically, whenever you will be picking this value, it is considered as a level 1 dot property 1. So this
It is
is
very
the
strict language, right? A small space misses, it will not work, right?
yes. But if you're working in any IDE like Eclipse, there's a plugin. So that plugin will help you to avoid that. For example, look at this. So this guy is having one plugin of YAML editor. So here it is going to take care. Even though you will give a space, it will manage it. It will format it also. So Control Shift F, if I press, you see automatically it is going to be format. So I will say something like this. This should also work. But if you give like this, it will give you error. So even one space is fine for this guy. Not C. So press Control Shift F. One tab space I have given, and it start working. Okay. So this example is just showing you how you can use YAML file in your Spring Boot rather than application.properties. Do I need to do anything change in the pom.xml file? Answer is no. Do I need to specify anything in our configurations? No. Spring Boot is smart enough to read or track your properties configuration. If it
So
is
basically, it will state whether it is an application.yaml or application.properties.
Yeah, both are acceptable. So whichever it is there, it can. But if both are there, then I'm not sure how it's gonna work. I never tried this, but yes, any of this file is there, it will be start working.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think worked sometime back with AWS.
this YAML file, right? You have worked.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. But if you ask me, I prefer the steel properties file. I don't know why. I'm very friendly with that.
I'm also afraid to touch this. It is very strict language. Single space, you'll go mad.
Yeah, so let's run this. And if you run it, then I'm supposed to get the values. What are the endpoints I have composed here? Just hello. I'm expecting the welcome message and app description should come. Welcome should come as a browser site. 9090. Welcome to your first Spring Boot app. This is coming from your message, which I'm returning. And you can also see the description in 5 minutes in your first Spring Boot application. So nothing much and nothing more complex here. Understood?
Yeah.
Let's move ahead. Another things which I want to touch right now is REST template.
So that is something used for consuming another REST service.
Yes, yes. You know everything, man. Okay. REST template is used for create applications that consume RESTful web services. So we have an exchange method to consuming the other guy's services. You know. So here, if you look at what I'm doing is I have a product.java which is having ID and name, pretty simple. So basically I'm a consumer and I know that in what format data is coming. So again, that contract has been made from the consumer to producer. This is the format I'm gonna give you the data. And if you look at my demo application, pretty simple, nothing much. Only the extra bean I'm creating, which is a REST template. Is this a good way? Maybe not, because don't try to break the principle. Bean should be in a configuration annotation. So you must have to create a separate file with the name of configuration and then create that bean here. But yeah, it's just for learning purpose. So for us, the structure not matters a lot. And since you are experienced guys, you know the code is standard, clean code guidelines, all these things you can easily manage. Okay. So this REST template object we are creating. Service. Auto binding with the REST template. Get product list. So I know that someone is going to hit the end URL for me like this. So what I'm doing, I'm creating a request headers. Then after I'm setting the what kind of data I want, set accept as a list because this is taking a list of data. So I've created a list, which is application JSON. And then after HTTP entity, passing these headers. So this is the repeating work you have to do every time. So rather than you can optimize this piece of code, put into one of the methods and try getting the HTTP entity every time, whatever you are looking for. Okay. So in a post call, you will be passing me the request body. I'm creating the product object, then I'm creating an entity and same entity I'm passing. But majorly you have to focus this REST template where we are calling the exchange method. What this exchange method is asking you? It is asking you to give URL, what is the method, and what is the entity, which is your HTTP entity. So might be you are looking for a JSON object, then you can write a code in such a way that your model class. So let's say you have some called product class. you can directly give the product.class here, and it will be giving you the complete details. But right now I'm expecting the string value, so I have taken the string.class and then get body. Okay, then we have a public URL. Where is this public URL methods? I have a public API call. So there is one dummy website created. I don't know whether you are knowing or not. So for testing purpose, this is not mine. So this is one of the website called requestresponse.in, and this guy is giving you some sample, REST APIs to play around or to test around. So here, if you go to this website, it will tell you fake data. So go to the down here and to get list all users. This is coming single user, something like this you have to give. Okay, so this is the page data I think I have given, page 2. So what I'm doing under this public API call, I'm calling one of my method, and this method is again using the REST template. And why intentionally I have used this? Because it is pretty simple like this. The URL is same. The only thing you have to notice is this is a HTTP, which is not secure. But here it is HTTPS. And that is the reason I have given this example. So when it is a HTTPS, you know that this is the secure. To access this page, you have to do some additional configuration because somebody is using the SSL enable for their website, and SSL enabled website can be accessed by these two configurations. So first thing, so you have to create a HTTP client. Then after you have to create a request factory, and then after under the template you have to pass this request factory. If you will straightforward use REST template, it will not work. So that is the reason I have created this two configuration passing to the REST template, and then here a method called get for object is also there. So pass your URI, pass your conversion type. If you are getting, if you have some POJO class or model class defined, you can directly pass that model class. If you have not defined, then a string is always there. And then finally, I'm printing that response. Other things are straightforward, but here I'm using this my application. So before running this application, I have to run my Spring Boot RESTful Web Services application. So let me start running that first. This one. It's working on 8090. And if you look at this web services, pretty simple. A static product has been defined here. So we have a two product right now, almonds and honey. And then after these are the APIs returning values. Now try running our this application. I hope I must have given the different port 9090. Yes. Java application. Okay. So the first method is this one. Localhost 9090 slash this one. Click on send. Cool. I'm getting the data. So I'm successfully able to make a call from this API to that API. I'm not going more detail about the product creation and all. You can try by yourself. If you're facing any problem, I can. But let's see this public URI also, whether this is going to work or not. This is also, yep, you can see that I'm getting a data. I'm returning a string. That's the reason it is always coming in a string format. But if you convert it there, the JSON return, then it will be coming defaultly like this.
I always have this question.
Yeah.
When you have, see, now there is an object called avatar, right? So seems like it is a profile pic or something of that user, and they've given a different URL for that
Okay.
in the response. So is that some storage place where you can access that image? How that images are given from a REST response?
Okay. So whenever, yeah, ideally, see, whenever people used to store an image, they used to maintain some common repository for that. So this is the ideal scenario which I have seen. So, and the user is providing the URL for that image rather than
But
passing
that
the image.
is secured right now. I think anyone who has that URL should be able to access. Right?
Yes, that's completely fine. But whoever is a consumer consuming that, they have the right access, right? Without having right access, you cannot hit that API itself.
Right. See, if I just want the only the profile pic of that user, so if you can give me that REST response avatar URI, I can open it from my side and I also can view that image, right? If you
Okay.
go back, just go back to Postman.
Okay.
See that image. So HTTPS requires that an image face. Yeah. If you click on that, uh,
1 second. It's
yeah,
coming like this.
right. Now, if you give me the same link, then also I'll be able to access it, right? There
Uh,
is no security.
I didn't get your question. So you're saying the passing like this is not a good way? Is that you're saying?
No, actually, it's easy like a REST service in a REST service. Is this also a REST service?
No, 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 no. This is not REST service. In fact, you can hit this URL. This is just a value for you.
Right. So now, if we secure this REST service, it will ask for authentication, and then only you can access the JSON, the complete whole user's data JSON. So, will that be applicable for this image also?
No,
That security,
no, no. That security is for hitting that API. Once you got the
right?
data, you have to access it. Why should
Right.
we will
So,
put yeah?
any public user will be able to access all the profile pics of that user, right?
Yes, that is
But
expected.
so that should not. For the, in that case, how the security will be implemented?
Security is while hitting the data. See, let's ignore this image right now. You got some balanced data. Some
That
users
I
balanced
understood.
data.
Data security and all I understood. I always have this question only how these things like profile pics and all should be made secure when you're resulting in a response. How these will be secure. So the response and the response is okay. It is secured. We can make it secured. But this image has made public, right? That's why I'm asking.
Okay, so you want to secure it, then there is a different set of design. So whenever you are hitting this URL, so you can put some sort of authentication there also. That can be easily done. You got a
So
URL,
probably that also will be in REST service again.
REST service again, or you can put some Amazon S3 bucket. There you need to pass some set of tokens. There's plenty of way to get that. So let's say these all images are sitting into one of the buckets. You put into the Amazon S3, and now you are expecting that user have to authenticate before accessing this. So you can expect some JSON, JWT token or something like that, or you can use the auth2 kinds of features, or you can use single sign-in kinds of features. So whoever is a valid user, they can get it. So on the top
Mhm.
of your API security, you can put one more layer of data security. That can be done.
Okay, fine.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the REST template. Any more question, Hemant?
No.
We are good.
Mm.
Okay.
So once we are end of this, not this class, but all the course,
Mhm.
maybe we can just, if you have any application implementing all these features in one application,
Okay.
then we'll revise in the last of the course, after
Okay.
covering all the.
Yeah, I don't have right now any application to implementing all these things. But if you want to know that, then you have to give me some sort of time because I'm a very busy person,
Yeah,
Then I can,
not now. That
huh,
end of the
huh,
session, like end of the course.
yeah, that we can do. Okay.
Yeah.
So all the security, REST, Swagger, everything's
You're right.
implemented
Yeah.
together, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay, that we can do, no problem. Okay, let's move ahead. And next topic we have is content negotiation. Do you know this? Have you heard
No.
about?
No.
Think about the consumer. You have two kinds of consumer. One is saying, hey, give me the data in XML, and another one is saying, give me the data in JSON. How can you handle that?
Okay.
That is all about content negotiation. And this could be end up with HTML also. So
Mhm.
ideally, when consumer is making a request, it had to come according to the guidelines of the consumer, provider. So usually we are providing the accept and something like that, you have noticed or not. But if you look at template.products. How to go back from here? I'm not able to see that option. Localhost. Colon. Localhost colon 9090 template.products. So during post call, we used to provide some set of content type. So if you see here, I don't know why it's not coming. Content type, it should come. So content type equal to application.json. We are setting something value like this. So now we have a users who can request XML also. So how can we handle that situation? And for that, we can ask three way. Look at this. This is what I was talking about. Under the headers, accept application XML, content type application JSON. Something like this you have to pass. So in this application, we will be seeing that how we can negotiate between the content type itself. So come to this application. Open the controller. This is straightforward, but student resource. This is my controller. This is my repository, which is using that student not found, student.java. Application.properties is properly empty. What is it like this? Form. Okay, I was just looking for git mapping. Fine. Some sort of just the correct one. Let me first run this.
So normally, Postman does that, right? It can
No.
convert the JSON or XML.
Postman is
Postman, you receive the JSON. Maybe it receives the JSON format, but it will pass that into an XML, right?
yes. So that manipulation is possible from the Postman side, but actually from an application point of view, how can you do that? Because the user who is making a request is not always going from the Postman, right? The consumer is
Right.
like again Spring Boot application, so you have to handle that situation also, right?
Right.
So for that purpose, we have to. But I'm scared I was having some sort of examples. I think it's missing from somewhere. How to make a call? Content type XML. Okay. Spring Boot application. Let me open it again. There is some problem with this application. It's not responding. Okay, so where are you? There is separate application, it seems, for this content. Let me search Spring Boot content negotiation. I think this is the application. It is unnecessarily creating a confusion for me. Yeah. So let's have some understanding. As I told you, usual scenario is we specify a method should return a response, either XML, JSON, HTML, or some another type also. But it may happen that we need the same method to return a response in different format, like sometimes XML, sometimes JSON. So this is how we're gonna do. And this can be done by 3 ways. First is path extension. So while making a request in the path itself, you can pass the value. What kinds of extension, what kinds of data you want. Second is the URL parameter. So if it is a get call, you have a URL. With that also you can do that, something like this: format equal to XML, format equal to JSON. And third way is that using except headers, which you have seen in the Postman. So we will be noticing this part here. So what I did here, I have created one class called webconfig, and this guy is extending with the class called webMVC configurer adapter. Under this itself, we have one method called content negotiation configurer. So Spring Boot itself is providing you this kinds of library. They know that there might be a scenario where user is going to use this. So first things, the default. I make a default content type, which is always going to be a XML. You can make default JSON, whatever you want. Whenever media type XML is coming, then this is XML. Whenever media type is JSON is coming, then application JSON. So how this media type is coming, you have to pass something like this. So while hitting this URL, you have to pass media equal to JSON, media equal to XML. So this is the one way. If you want the extension, so that time user have to pass you the dot extension value. So here you will see you're just passing the employee along with the media type. But if you put implied dot JSON, so this guy is going to work. So this configurer is also having an option of ignore except headers, use JF false, and then it will be start picking up the value according to the extension which you are passing. This property determines whether to allow use of JAF, that is Java Activation Framework, to resolve a path extension to a specific media type. So this JAF which you are using right now, it's helping you to pick up this .json extension, and based upon this extension, it is going to prepare the response for you. So it is an adapter, or it can be easily plug in plug out kinds of things. So webconfig is having enabled webMVC1 annotation and doing some sort of configuration for content negotiation. Coming to the controller, controller is having some sort of request mapping, then method equal to get and produce. Usually we are going to give the JSON or XML, but here it might be that your application is pushing both the data, producing both the data. So we have given both JSON and XML, which can be decided based upon the user request. Model is pretty simple. It is employee.java, which is holding the @ of XML root element, which is one of the annotations for parsing your XML. So there are lots of library available, JAX, Bean, all these things, which is actually doing the marshalling and unmarshalling operations with your Java object. So with that, let me run this program and show you how it's gonna work. 8080. Localhost, oh, we can directly copy this value. So for media type, this is the URL. You got a JSON value. Now I'm changing to XML. You can see that it is producing now XML data. So this is a small topic, but sometimes it is useful. You should know how the content negotiation can be done. If you want to use this part, then what I have to do, I have to uncomment this section, and then I have to hit this employee.json or employee.xml. Based upon that also, the data will be producing according to this. Got it? And Postman side, you know that. Change the request headers. So default is, this is coming JSON, this is coming XML, and let's say I'm not passing anything in the request header. Content type, application JSON. I think this I have not implemented or what, I don't know. It is just taking the two set of configuration I have given, either the dot extension or media type. So if you want to use the content type also, you have to add what more configuration that figure it out. Or if you want, I can figure it out. So that's the example for this. Understood, Hemant?
Yeah.
Okay. Next topic is exception handling. So you know Java exception handling, right? Pakka, you know?
Try catch.
You know, I always have one question in exception handling. And when I used to take an interview for my company, even 8 years, 9 years, guys also give me the answer, which I'm not satisfied. And that question is, what is the difference between checked exception and unchecked exception? You know?
About that.
Typically, what answer I used to get, checked exception is a compile time exception and unchecked exception is a runtime exception. Are you agree?
Actually, unchecked is not compile time, but maybe
Okay.
not compile time, but maybe
See,
may not be in runtime.
so exception categories, you know, right? So we have a throwable, then we have a class called exception and error. In that exception, we have a runtime exception. Whichever class is extending runtime exception, those are known as unchecked exception, like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, number format exception, array index out of bound exception. These are the exceptions which is actually a something like this: int I equal 10 divided by 0. So this is one of the arithmetic exception, right? So compiler is not going to force you anything. Your program is terminating. Arithmetic exception. So there is no error at all. But there is one more exception called, let's say, for example, class.forName. You've given some sort of class here. This guy is going to give you the error. So this is throwing one exception called class not found exception. And it is forcing you to put a try catch or use a throws keyword. So this is unchecked and this is checked. So when I ask what is the difference between unchecked and checked, the answer which I'm getting is checked exception is a compile time exception because of this error. And unchecked exception is a runtime exception because after running itself, you are going to get this arithmetic exception. So this is my question to you. Are you agree with this answer? Each checked exception is a compile time exception.
No, it will be both.
Both. It will be both.
Both. If you surround this with try catch again, that will be an unchecked exception.
Okay. But what my take is here, exception is never compile time. Exception is always a runtime. The reason I'm saying you, if you're thinking this is the error because of exception, then someone might be wrong. This is my opinion. I'm telling you why. This is just a syntax error. Compiler is just checking your syntax. If your program is syntactically correct, compiler is not having any issue. Think about this exception. Syntactically, this is completely fine. For a compiler, 10 is also an integer number, 0 is also one of the integer number. So he's saying user wants to divide one integer by division another integer. I don't have any issue. This is completely fine. Syntactically, it is correct, so you're not getting any error here. But runtime is there, who is not checking syntactically, but it is checking logically your program is correct or not. And logically, this is incorrect because no one can divide a number by 0. That is completely wrong. Now, then what about this? This is also a instruction given to a compiler. Whenever people are using this kinds of exception, then please force them to use try catch. It doesn't mean that it find that it is exception. If it is so, then I put a try catch, for example, and exception is gone, error is gone. Does it mean that the exception will not come? After running this program, definitely your program will terminate, because there is no class with the name of HJJGH. So my question is the people who is saying, they are saying that it is a compile time exception. Then my question is, if it is a compile time exception, then compiler should know what exception you got right now. This compiler should give you error here and tell you, hey, this class is not available. But we are not getting that error. It means exception occurred only at runtime. After running this program, I come to know that JVM is looking for this class. He didn't found anywhere in your class path, and it is saying, I'm sorry, this is not available in your class path. So that's all. I will terminate your program. But saying this, it is a compile time exception is a wrong. That's my answer is. The reason is compiler is just checking out syntax. Someone has told him, force them to use try catch if somebody is using the check exception like class not found exception, IO exception, file not found exception, all these things. So agree?
Yeah.
Fine. But our discussion is quite different. Let's say you got a requirement from your industry saying that, hey, I want to maintain a audit management kinds of features. So what this audit management kinds of feature is saying that whenever any operation is happening across the any REST API call, like get, put, post, create, all these things, I want you to capture the data of that user, like what is the user ID, what time he has modified, what was the old value, what is the new value. These information you have to capture irrespective of any method call. So what will be your design? How you will design this solution? One simple approach is you will write one class, right? And then after, what you will do is in every method, you will go and call that method to update the value. So how we are doing this service dot update user method. Similarly, we will write one class called audit controller, and this guy is having the capture data method. I will call this audit control dot capture data in get also, post also, put also, delete also, and we will pass whatever data this guy is looking. This is the typical approach, isn't it? Hemant, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah.
So this is the typical way people used to think about this. But what is the problem with this approach? This approach is having a problem. You are modifying the core business logic. Unnecessarily, we're pushing one piece of code there that is taking a time also. And if somebody is saying, hey, this should be an independent task and another thread have to do this, then you are stuck. If you put any things inside this method, even though that is not a part of your regular business logic, but you kept inside this block, then this is going to be executed by only one thread. Whoever is executing remaining code, those guys will be executing your code also. So the big problem we will face here is there is a performance hit, because when you are doing audit kinds of things, you might be pushing this information into a file or into a database. So you have to take an additional cost of doing this additional auditing kinds of things. So if you do so, calling the audit methods inside your regular classes, regular methods, your design will be rejected. Now, what is the next approach? Next approach is, this is the one problem you face. Sometime after people found that, hey, auditing is done. I don't want this to be anymore existing in my code. Just disable this. Since you have written into the method level and you want to disable it, what you have to do? You have to go and remove that piece of code which you have written in each method across the all controller, or comment that. Again, you are breaking a principle, and that principle is saying single responsibility principle. Yes, so solid principle is completely going to be break here because you are modifying. Under the solid, O is there, open for extension, close for modification. This principle is breaking when you are doing so. So this board design, this design itself is not good. We have to look into the some different approach where we can enable these features like a plug-in, plug-out. Think about the similar kinds of requirement like e-commerce. E-commerce want you to send a offer message in every recharge time. So recharge is basically one of the CRUD operation. It could be a create recharge method where you are doing mobile recharge. What this guy wants you, whenever user is doing mobile recharge, you need to send them a message saying that get 25% off in next transaction, next recharge. And again, this is kinds of a plug-in, plug-out. This offer can be a limited period. After some time, you have to remove that. So how can you handle these all situations? Let's come to the another problem, which is one of the typical example I'm going to give you under this. Somebody wants to prepare a alarm system. So you have a very critical system, which is basically doing a very big business logic processing. But during this processing, it might be that something went wrong. So for example, you are doing some validation that that validation is failed, or you are sending some data to the external messaging system like Kafka or RabbitMQ, that broker itself is down. So what administrator want to know that this transaction is failed for what reason? So whenever anything is happening like your Kafka broker is down or your business validation is failed, you might be getting some exception. So somebody wants you to capture these all exceptions and push it into one of the database called alarm table, so that the data of this alarm table will be easily displayed in the UI grid, and somebody can understand, okay, this transaction is failed because of this reason. Are you getting my point? So this is one of the requirement. How can you handle it? So if you work in the servlet and JSP kinds of application, there is something called filter. Have you heard about filter?
No, we use generally Log4j and all that.
Yeah, log4j is for logging management, but there is a filter. What is filter? It is a interceptor. Have you heard about interceptor at least? Request interceptor.
Heard about it.
Right. So that is nothing but a filter. So in legacy application, when you have the proper servlet application, the requirement is like whenever request is coming, you have to validate that whether this request is having those headers or not, which you are looking for. So based upon that, you can ignore or reject that request. So whatever request is coming to a particular server, you are interrupting that request, doing your business logic execution, and then after you are proceeding further. So filter is used for pre and post execution of particular servlet. Means before going to this actual request, actual request handler. In our case, in Spring FSA, I wanted to intercept the request whichever is coming to the controller. And when it is going back, I want you to again intercept that response also. So request and response, both you want to intercept, and for that purpose, filter is going to be used. So I will highly recommend you just have a at least thoda bahut idea of, Hindi, Hemant?
Lightly.
Okay.
I can understand.
Filter tutorial. So you can refer any website. Let's talk about tutorials point itself. So look at this. No, this guy has taken another filter. Hold on. Look at this. So this is the incoming request. You have a server here, and these two filters are sitting here. So whatever request is going, it will intercept that. And again, whatever response is going, it is intercept that. And something like that, it will produce a result. So similar approach you have to take in Spring also whenever you have a audit kinds of mechanism, or you have to handle the exception alarm kinds of system. And this can be done with one of the Spring framework module called AOP. Have you heard about AOP?
Yeah, heard.
Aspect oriented programming. Yes, so I'm talking about that one. So AOP is one of the modules of Spring which is having the advice classes cross-cutting concern. So you write a piece of code one time and you tell this AOP wherever you want to implement this. So simple examples, I want to handle the exception or I want to customize this exception. For example, so in REST API also think about the situation. Whenever user is trying to hit something and he got some exception, which is kinds of, take one examples of class not found exception, something like this. So if the same exception is going to the consumer, he might be not understanding the technical stuffs. So somebody has told you that whenever any exception is coming, write your own class to understand that exception, what is the real cause, and prepare a proper JSON response. And that response you have to send to the user saying that, hey, you try hitting this API, this information was missing, because of this, the flow has broken. And this standard have to be maintained across the all API call. So what you have to do? You have to write a common logic for this. And whenever exception occurs, you will ask that exception, hey, before sending the response, come to me. The moment exception come, your logic is automatically going to be executed. And it is figuring out what is the failure region. And then finally, it is sending the response back. So that's all happening with the help of AOP, aspect-oriented programming. It is a different programming paradigm itself. It's a different approach. So we are going to use the same in a Spring Boot to handle our exception. So quite more discussion on this. Let's try understanding. So handling exceptions and errors in APIs and sending the proper response to the client is good for enterprise application. This is what I was talking. So you don't send the simply 500 error arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, because your technical user is not knowing what is this null pointer exception. So you have to take a responsibility of properly handle the exception and send the human readable answer. Before
So
proceeding with
basically,
the
before
yeah
sending the request to the controller
response,
itself,
no, this is a different story. Whenever exception occurred, you want to give something like that, irrespective of request and response. Anyway,
so
user has made a request, but I want, whenever anything went wrong, I want to give a proper reason why this problem occurs. Okay. So there is one annotation called at the rate of controller advice. This annotation will help you to delegate the flow from one class to another class. And this is what I'm going to use. So see the flow. In the pom.xml file, I don't think so we have anything additional here. It is same whatever you have seen in the previous one, nothing additional. In resources, again nothing important as it is. What I have additional here is So we have this demo application, we have a product.java, we have one of the service controller. This service controller is basically having the product ID, and whenever you will say, give me this product ID, this will return you the product. So update product, get product, and get products. Okay, so I'm focusing about this method. Imagine user is trying to get a product for a particular ID, and that ID itself is not exist. So I have a map here, which consider it's a DAO layer. From map, I'm checking that whether contains key or not. If it is not contains key, I'm throwing one exception called product not found exception. Now, this product not found exception is a proper formulated. So if you look at this, I have my own custom exception defined, product not found exception, which is extending the runtime exception. It's pure code Java, how to create your own exception. But I'm not handling this exception here. There is a separate handler. Look at this. This is our control advice class. This is the logic which you have to mainly focus how you can use AOP. This class is having one annotation called @controller advice. And this guy is saying @exception handler, means wherever this exception occurs, irrespective of any controller service DAO layer, wherever it is. This guy is saying the moment I found this exception occurred, this method will be automatically executing. So that's called cross-cutting concern. And I'm using a @exception handler. Now think about the situation, alarm system, which I told you. Do you need to write a logic in the every classes? No. The only thing you have to do is throw an exception. The moment you throw an exception, this guy is going to automatically pick up. Now, this is a specific to product not found exception. You can easily maintain exception.class also. If you make exception.class, it means what? Every exception field comes under this, right? This is the supermost class for every exception. Hemant, are you with me? Hello?
Yeah, I'm following.
Yeah. So if you have a specific, then write something like this. If you have a generic exception, any exception occurred, you want to handle here. That's what the idea was, right? So whenever you have any exception API sending the proper response, yeah, client is good for response to the client is good for enterprises application. So in
So
that case,
basically, wherever we throw an exception or whenever any exception has occurred, it will directly invoke this method, right?
exactly, you got it. That's what the intention is. Yes. But here I
So
have made
we
quite
need to create a class, separate class, and add an annotation controller advice and
yes,
exception handler.
that's all. Write your own logic.
So
What you want,
go
you
with
can.
the,
Mhm.
yeah, if we can go with the exception dot class as a super class. If not, we can go with the
Custom
like.
exception. If you have some specific exception, let's say for product not found, you have a separate logic to be executed. Then you can write something like this. If you have some
So
exception, you can overload this method, something like that. I mean
so
over.
okay. So my question is like, at what stage it will occur? Like when an exception is occurred, or after it executes the catch statement, it will trigger.
No, when you have exception, this is actually a handler. Look at this. So why you should have now catch? You should not have catch.
So okay, if we are having a catch, a try catch block, then it will not be executed.
I don't think so. It will not execute. I think the moment you are throwing exception, if you look at this is quite funny. Also, you can think about that. You itself throwing an exception, and you itself is handling the exception. That's not make sense, right? But I will try to check that also. What is happening if I have a try catch? Most of the things, I think yes. The moment you are throwing exception, this exception occurred, then this piece of logic have to be executed. Doesn't matter you are handling or not handling.
Okay.
I will do it, demonstrate it. to get a confidence. So the flow you understood, right? This is the typical
Yeah.
flow we are doing. So let me run this demo application and see what's happening. (8090) and what is the URL? Products. Yeah. So I will go here. Products. I'm expecting the all products should come. It's 8090. Yes. Now give a product ID 1. We got a product ID 1. Clear the console. Now I'm giving a product ID which is not available. Okay. What is my expectation is this guy will come to this particular method and it will check in the repository. The product itself is not available. This is throwing an exception. The moment it's throwing the exception, it will directly go to the exception controller. He will print this message in the console and it will give me a message, this one, product not found. Let's hit that. Cool. Can you see that? I'm getting a product not found. And here also there is an exception occurred. So this is also coming. Now coming back to your concern which you were having, what if I have a try catch? Exception EX. Okay. Product service. Let me run it again. Run a Java application. So my call is, even though it is handling, it should display me this results. Yes, and we are right.
Oh.
So you got your clarity, right? So this
Right,
event is going to be triggered by this line itself. And this is, I think, by default coming from a different thread. You have some mechanism by which you can ask that this logic have to be executed independently by another thread also. So when you have an alarm kinds of features, it is going to be by different thread. Okay.